It's midnight, you're scrolling through real estate listings on your phone. Every house that doesn't look like it's about to collapse costs $1 million. Not a mansion, not a beachfront property, not some luxury estate with a gate and a long driveway, just a regular house, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, a yard barely big enough for a grill. The kitchen has cabinets from 2008. The carpet is beige. The basement looks like it's seen better decades, and the listing calls it a perfect family home. That's the moment something feels off. You start doing the math in your head, your income, your savings, your last raise, and you wonder, did I miss a promotion? Did everyone else suddenly level up, or did the entire housing market lose its mind? Here's the uncomfortable truth. It's not you, it's the math. And the math is brutal. $1 million used to mean something. It meant wealth. It meant success. It meant you had made it. Now in dozens of US cities, $1 million is just entry level. It's the baseline price for a normal life in a normal neighborhood for people with normal jobs. And that's the real problem. Because most people aren't asking the right question anymore. They're not asking, can I afford this? They're asking, can I get approved? Those are not the same thing. In this video, we're not going to talk about what a bank will lend you. We're going to do something far more uncomfortable. We're going to figure out who can actually afford $1 million house in 2026 without turning their life into a permanent financial stress test. Not who qualifies, but who buys the house and still gets to sleep at night. Because there's a massive difference between owning a home and being owned by it. And once you see the numbers clearly, you can't unsee them. Before we go any further, we need to be very clear about one thing. This video is not about who can get approved. It's not about credit scores. It's not about loan programs. It's not about how much a bank is willing to lend you. Because that question is easy to answer. Banks approve loans based on models, ratios, historical averages, and the assumption that nothing goes wrong. That's not real life. So we're asking a different question. Who can buy a $1 million house and still live like a human being afterward? Who signs the papers and doesn't turn their next decade into a financial stress simulator? There is a massive difference between qualifying for a $1 million mortgage and actually being able to live with it. Banks care about repayment. Mortgage brokers care about approvals. Real estate agents care about closing. None of them price in anxiety. None of them price in burnout. None of them price in what it feels like to wake up every morning knowing one mistake could collapse everything. And culturally, we've been trained to believe that stretching is winning, that if you don't buy as much house as possible, you're falling behind. That discomfort is just part of the process. This video exists to challenge that idea. Because the math doesn't care about motivation, and approval does not equal safety. Now let's ground this in reality. When we talk about a $1 million house in 2026, we're not talking about luxury, we're talking about baseline. In places like the Bay Area, $1 million gets you a modest single-family home with no view, no pool, no gate. In Los Angeles, it buys you a normal house within commuting distance of jobs that actually pay enough to support the mortgage. In New York suburbs, especially anywhere with decent schools, $1 million is the entry ticket. Seattle, parts of Austin, upscale suburbs near major tech and finance hubs. Same story. $1 million doesn't buy extravagance, it buys normal. No ocean view, no private driveway, no architectural statement, just space, a roof, and proximity to income. That's what makes this moment so strange. The price doesn't look rich, only the payment does, and that disconnect is where people get trapped. Because culturally $1 million still sounds extreme, but structurally it's been normalized. Listings don't scream luxury, they whisper family home. And when something expensive is framed as normal, people stop questioning whether it makes sense. They stop asking, who is this actually for? And they start assuming that if houses cost this much, someone like them must be able to afford it. That assumption is exactly what we're about to test. Because once you put real numbers against this price, the pool of people who can truly afford it shrinks fast. And most of them don't look like the average buyer scrolling listings at midnight. Now we hit the first immovable wall. The down payment on a $1 million house. The traditional rule is simple: 20% down. That's $200,000 in cash, before you even talk about monthly payments. Now here's the part where the fantasy collapses. The median savings balance in the United States is roughly $8,000 to $10,000. That means most people aren't short by $20,000. They're not short by $50,000. They're short by almost $200,000. This isn't a gap, it's a canyon. And before someone says, "I'll just save aggressively," let's run that math honestly. Let's assume a high earner, $200,000 a year in income, which already puts you in a small minority. Now assume you're disciplined. You save 15% of your gross income. That's about $30,000 a year. At that pace, it takes nearly 7 years just to accumulate the down payment. 7 years of perfect consistency, no layoffs, no medical emergencies, no kids, no market downturns. And that's assuming home prices stay flat, which historically they don't. So by the time you finally reach $200,000 in savings, the house you wanted may cost $1.2 million. The target moves faster than the saver. This is why the 20% rule has quietly died in practice. Not because it stopped being smart, but because it became unreachable. And that leads to the pivot almost everyone makes. So most people don't put 20% down. Instead, they do what the system allows: 10% down. On a $1 million house, that's $100,000 up front. Still enormous, but at least it feels possible. Now here's what that decision actually unlocks: a $900,000 loan and something called PMI private mortgage insurance. PMI typically runs anywhere from $400 to $700 per month on a loan this size. And it's important to understand what PMI really is. You're not insuring your home, you're not protecting yourself, you're paying insurance to protect the bank from the fact that you weren't wealthy enough to put 20% down. It does nothing for you. It doesn't reduce your risk. It doesn't build equity faster. It's a monthly financial penalty for starting the race without enough capital. So let's pause on what just happened. You're buying a $1 million asset. You're taking on a 30-year obligation. And before you've paid a single dollar of principal, you're already paying hundreds of dollars a month for the privilege of being approved. This is the real starting line for most buyers. Not stability, not ownership, but higher fixed costs from day one. And we haven't even touched interest, taxes, insurance, or maintenance yet. That's where the math stops being uncomfortable and starts being brutal. Now we finally arrive at the number most people obsess over: the monthly payment. Let's keep this conservative. No worst case assumptions, no scare tactics, just standard current reality. You put 10% down, you borrow $900,000. At an interest rate around 6.5%, your principal and interest payment lands somewhere between $5,700 and $6,000 per month. And that's just the mortgage. That number is what people quote when they say "I can afford it." But that number is incomplete, because owning a house comes with layers. Let's add them. Property taxes in markets where $1 million homes are normal typically run between $12,000 and $15,000 per year. That's roughly $1,000 to $1,300 every single month. Now insurance. Homeowners insurance has exploded in cost. Between climate risk rebuilding costs and location, you're realistically looking at $350 to $500 per month. Then there's maintenance, the boring cost everyone ignores until something breaks. The long-standing rule of thumb is 1% of the home's value per year. On a $1 million house, that's $10,000 annually, or about $830 per month. And don't forget PMI. Because you didn't put 20% down, you're still paying $500 a month to insure the bank. So let's stack this honestly. Mortgage principal and interest approximately $5,800. Property taxes approximately $1,200. Insurance approximately $400. Maintenance approximately $830. PMI approximately $500. Your real monthly housing cost is now sitting somewhere between $8,400 and $9,100 every month. And this is before HOA fees, before special assessments, before a roof replacement, before a water heater decides to die on a Sunday night. So let's say this clearly, that's not a payment, that's a lifestyle commitment. And now we ask the only question that actually matters. Who can carry that without their entire life shrinking around it? To answer that, we have to work backward. Financial planning standards exist for a reason. The conservative rule says housing should not exceed 28% of your gross income. Some advisors relax it to 35% of take-home pay. That's already generous. Let's use both. If your housing cost is $9,000 per month, and that represents 28% of gross income, you need to earn roughly $385,000 per year. Now let's be lenient. If $9,000 represents 35% of your take-home pay, you're still looking at around $310,000 in annual household income. Not once, not temporarily, consistently. Stable income, low volatility, no heavy reliance on bonuses or commissions. Because when your fixed cost is $9,000 a month, income swings are no longer inconvenient. They're dangerous. So let's freeze the conclusion. To comfortably afford a $1 million home in 2026, you're not talking about someone making good money. You're talking about a household earning between $300,000 and $400,000 per year. And that immediately removes the vast majority of people from the equation. Not because they're irresponsible, not because they didn't work hard enough, but because the math doesn't negotiate. And what comes next is where most people finally understand why this decision breaks lives. Because the danger isn't just whether you can afford it, it's what happens to everything else in your life after you say yes. So if $1 million home requires $300,000 to $400,000 a year to carry comfortably, who is actually buying them? Not hypothetically, not aspirationally. In reality, the first group is dual-income households at the very top of the labor market. Tech plus tech, finance plus tech, senior engineers, partners, executives. Two strong incomes, often both above six figures, often both relatively stable. But income alone isn't the whole story. The second group is business owners with predictable cash flow, not startups, not people between exits. Owners with mature businesses, steady distributions, and the ability to smooth income across bad months. They don't just earn more, they control timing. The third group is the quiet one people don't like to talk about. Households with existing equity or family money. They're rolling gains from a previous home purchase, or receiving help with the down payment. That reduces the loan. It removes PMI. It changes the math completely. And here's the important part. What all these groups share is not just high income. It's margin. They have slack. They have buffers. They have room to absorb mistakes. If income drops, they don't immediately panic. If expenses spike, they don't go into survival mode. And that leads to the insight most people misunderstand. Income buys approval. Margin buys survival. Banks care about income. Life cares about margin. And when you confuse those two, you end up approved for something that quietly owns you. Which brings us to the part that shocks people the most. Even households that technically qualify can still be financially trapped. Let's make this concrete. Meet a household earning $320,000 per year. On paper, that sounds like success. After federal taxes, state taxes, FICA, and reasonable retirement contributions, they're taking home roughly $16,000 per month. That's real money. Now subtract housing. Their $1 million home costs them $9,000 a month all in. Mortgage, tax, insurance, maintenance, PMI. That leaves $7,000, $7,000 for everything else. 2 cars to commute, $800 to $1,000 gone. Insurance for those cars, another $200. Health insurance premiums and out-of-pocket costs. $400. Childcare, school costs, activities. Easily $1,500. Groceries for a family trying to eat decently. $800. Utilities, phones, internet. $400. We haven't talked about vacations. We haven't talked about saving beyond the basics. We haven't talked about emergencies. Suddenly that $7,000 is mostly spoken for. This household isn't poor. But they're not free. Every decision is filtered through one question. Does this threaten the house? Job changes feel risky. Entrepreneurial ideas feel irresponsible. Taking time off feels dangerous. Not because they're weak, not because they're bad with money, but because their fixed cost is enormous. They live well as long as nothing goes wrong. And that's the definition of fragility. This is why people earning $300,000 a year can still feel anxious. Why they feel behind despite doing everything right. They didn't buy irresponsibly, they bought at the edge. And when your lifestyle lives at the edge, peace disappears quietly, not in a crisis, but in constant vigilance. At this point, the pattern should be clear, because what you're experiencing isn't a personal miscalculation. It's a system working exactly as designed. Let's be precise about who benefits. The bank benefits. A $1 million mortgage produces decades of interest, predictable cash flow, minimal downside because the asset is collateralized by your life. The real estate agent benefits. Their commission scales with price, not sustainability. They're paid to close, not to protect your future flexibility. The city benefits. Property taxes rise with valuations. Higher prices mean higher recurring revenue without any concern for your cash flow margin. Every entity in the transaction is rewarded for getting you into the house. None of them are rewarded for what happens after. Not if your income stalls, not if your health changes, not if the job market tightens, not if your priorities shift. Those risks are transferred to you, quietly, legally, permanently. And that leads to the sentence most people never hear before signing. The system is optimized to get you in the house, not to keep your life flexible. Approval is not alignment. Affordability is not resilience. The transaction assumes stability. Your life guarantees change. And when those two collide, the house doesn't adjust. You do. So let's close this the right way. Not with fear, not with advice. With the correct question. Don't ask, can I buy a $1 million house? That question is easy to answer and dangerously irrelevant. Ask this instead, if my income dropped by 20%, would my life still work? Ask this one too, does this decision open the next 10 years or quietly lock them? Because the real cost of a $1 million home isn't the price, it's the rigidity. It's what you can no longer say yes to. It's how much risk you can no longer absorb. It's how carefully you must now live to avoid destabilizing everything. This isn't about avoiding homeownership forever. It's about timing and structure. Buying a home doesn't make you safe. Margin does. Flexibility does. Optionality does. And the right house isn't the biggest one you can qualify for. It's the one that lets you sleep at night even when life deviates. Because a $1 million house doesn't require a $1 million lifestyle. It requires a $1 million margin mindset. And most people don't lose financially because they chose wrong. They lose because they chose too early.